Hello, everyone. This is the SMC Journal podcast, the show that's all about performance engineering in IT. Today, I'm Scott Moore, your host, and thank you so much for being with us today. Digital experience. This is something that we will continue to talk about a lot on the show. Observability is part of that. Monitoring is part of that. Testing is part of that. Tuning is part of that. All of it equals whatever the digital experience a user is experiencing. One of the important pieces to that is real user monitoring. Many companies are doing synthetic monitoring where they create their own automated processes to monitor what's going on in production, but sometimes that doesn't capture the whole picture. So enter real user monitoring where you can capture exactly what users are doing from their own traffic. I found an article recently online from InfoQ from Carly Richmond talking about how you need both and why RUM is so important, which led me to look up Carly Richmond, who works for Elastic. And I've been wanting to have someone from Elastic on this show for quite some time. So I contacted her and said, why don't you be on the show and let's talk about Elastic, the company, where you're taking your own observability platform, as well as your article and why RUM is so important. So it turned out to be a great conversation. But before we get into that conversation, let's talk about the sponsors that make this SMC Journal podcast possible. This episode is sponsored by Micro Focus and the LoadRunner Solutions family. That includes LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise, Cloud, and Developer. You know, performance matters. Did you know that LoadRunner Solutions have the largest community of practitioners in the world? Join that community at community.microfocus.com, scan the QR code, and check out the LoadRunner family page on performance engineering, as well as their YouTube playlist that we've got links for in the show notes on smcjournal.com as well as YouTube. This episode is sponsored by PFLB, a provider of premier load and performance testing services for enterprises in all industries. They focus on a robust methodology, tools, and experienced engineers. Since 2008, they've built a reputation for reliability worldwide. BoomQ is their own innovative performance testing solution, and they consult around industry standard tools like JMeter, LoadRunner, Grafana, and more. Find out more at pflb.us. This episode is sponsored by StormForge. The StormForge platform focuses on AI-powered software designed to help DevOps teams release with confidence and help your IT leaders realize the promise of cloud native. That means faster innovation, higher quality, resiliency, scalability, and efficiency. Find out more at stormforge.io. Thank you once again, sponsors, for supporting the SMC Journal podcast and the performance community as a whole, being with us all of this year of 2022. We really appreciate it. So, on with the interview with Carly Richmond. Hi, Carly. Welcome to the SMC Journal podcast.
Hey, Scott.
I have lots of questions because of you work for Elastic. I've been wanting to have someone on the show from Elastic since we began in January. So you work for Elastic, but you've only been there for like less than a year. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I actually joined Elastic April of this year. And before that, I was a developer working in investment banking for just over 10 years. So I've basically moved over.
You're no
out
a
of
stranger
finance
to
tech.
the digital experience, though. This is not something new for you.
No, it's not. I mean, my niche is front end web development, and obviously, working in a bank in particular, I had a very unique opportunity to actually collaborate with users directly. It's something that you don't tend to have a lot when you work in tech because your users are normally outside of your company.
Right.
But certainly that was one big plus for me, which was cool because in a way I got to learn about finance. I got to meet people from all sorts of different backgrounds with different knowledge bases. That was really cool. But it meant that naturally, with the front end piece and knowing my users personally, I was always interested in what's the experience they're getting from my application, Are they actually using the features that I'm building? If not, why not? Can we make it better? Are they getting a good experience? Is it lagging? Is it not very performant? Can I try and anticipate outages before they happen? This is something that is kind of the holy grail when you work directly with users in such a close relationship like that. And yeah, that's pretty much kind of formed coming into Elastic a lot of the initial focus areas. I started looking at real user monitoring and synthetics off the back of that experience.
My background comes from testing and QA and specifically performance and load testing, where we're always focused on the back end, pushing the back end infrastructure as hard as you can, monitoring it and looking at it. But then I've seen over the last, say, 10 years or so, there's been a big emphasis on the front end piece as well. And now we've got, Lighthouse and Core Web Vitals that are telling us things on the front end that would indicate, I mean, we really need both. If you push the back end, but your digital experience on the front end, where you're not utilizing those resources properly because you haven't built the front end right, you're still going to miss the bigger picture, right? I mean, that's what it's all about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the interesting things I found working with users is that they don't differentiate between front end and back end. We as technologists, as testers, we do that. And they'll just see it as something's not working. So quite often, if any issues came up on the operational side and it got escalated up through operations over to us on the development side, it would come to me directly anyway as the first port of call, because it's what they see and they think it's something up with the front end first. So you really need to have, use application monitoring on your back-end services, use all those great techniques, but you really need to have things on the front end to give a holistic experience and also help you figure out where the problem actually is. I mean, slowness can happen on the front end if you've written the application poorly, just as the same as it can happen on the server side or in any of the infrastructure. So we need to be able to diagnose issues at all levels. And that was certainly my experience.
So using Elastic, I started using Elastic back around 2018, specifically for the APM piece. The customer I was working with was already a customer of Elasticsearch. And so the Elk stack was not new to them. And it seems to me that creating these visualizations from data points like Kibana does, that Elastic was built for observability. It was built for monitoring and security monitoring as well, because it's all logs, it's all data points. So I could see how moving into Elastic in the role that you're in right now would be kind of seamless for you, right?
Yeah, in some ways, in terms of that kind of technical perspective, being a developer and that user focus, yeah, absolutely. And also having experiences with operations people, support people who have used, we didn't use tools like Elastic, but we used similar things. So I had experience of it and was able to pick things up relatively quickly, knowing the concepts. It was more around finding the voice and the things that were interesting to people that wanted to hear about Elastic specifically. That was actually the thing I had to kind of figure out. But you know what? I've had tons of help doing that over the past 6 months.
Yeah,
So that's
I
been
bet
really
you
good.
have.
Well, yeah.
When I talk to customers when I mention Elastic, and I'm coming in as a performance engineer. They're like, you're a performance engineer. Why are you talking about Elastic? That's a
Yeah.
search. No. It's way more than that. And I remember when APM was announced, I want to say that was in 2018. And it was the first time I had put together a bunch of Docker containers on a single machine and spun this thing up in like 5 minutes. And you had all the, I'm like, there's not a bunch of CDs to put into a computer. And we've got this thing running, and the visualizations were so easy and stunning. If you learn Kibana, you can do some really cool stuff with it. But it seems like from that point, it's changed over time. It was like the progress was so rapid from that time even to now. They've never really stopped moving forward in the capabilities. And I want to bring the page up here for Elastic. And I guess it's called Elastic APM. I'm not sure APM is what everybody's talking about observability now, but it's still APM. This really is an observability platform, because you have infrastructure monitoring. You're looking at your logs. You have RUM and you have synthetic monitoring. And then we have a profiling capability with the acquisition of Optimizely last October. So can you talk about this whole thing that Elastic is offering here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd like to point out you're very fair in terms of we're known for Elasticsearch, because even today, I still speak to people in the observability space, people looking at performance, operational side, and they're all saying to me, don't you guys build Elasticsearch? I'm like, yes, but we have other things too. But it gives us the basis. That's why we can do interesting things with each of these offerings within the observability product, and give you things like performance searching over the logs from different data sources, which can always be a bit of a nightmare if you're in a panic situation. So certainly that's something that we've worked really hard with the logs piece for the logs monitoring, and you can have alerting on key things as well. You talked about the infrastructure monitoring, being able to see things like key infrastructure elements if they're up, if they're alive, kind of see an overall holistic view of your inventory. We then talked about real user monitoring. So that's basically capturing for JavaScript front-end applications, being able to capture things like clicks, navigations, all that information against the live user behavior so that we can then calculate useful things like the Google Core Web Vitals, which you mentioned earlier on. And then finally, synthetics, which some is going through a bit of a revamp at the moment, but we have, the basic pings for HTTP, TCP, ICMP endpoints, and then they're working quite heavily on the kind of browser monitoring side of things. So basically either using the beta recorder or also using playwright scripts that perhaps you've written yourself and being able to use those to periodically monitor your application to see what's going on. Is it still alive? Perhaps trying to identify an alert for potential slowness against these key user journeys that they're doing against your application. And you quite rightly pointed out that, we need this for a holistic picture for monitoring an application. That is, we've got to cover all of our pillars of observability. And through these 4 things, as part of the observability suite, with all the traces and all the other visualizations it gives you, you should be able to do exactly that. And I've heard some wonderful things from people that have been using it as a result.
At the end of the day, it's a bunch of data points, and how you visualize that and get somebody to root cause the fastest. That's the win for an observability platform, in my opinion. Let's talk a little bit about this as a platform. What do you think differentiates Elastic APM from something like a Splunk or a Dynatrace or a Datadog?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that make us a little bit different. I guess the first thing is really around on-prem versus cloud SaaS offering. We have both of those available, and obviously we know that some other competitors will have a cloud-first approach and they won't have that on-prem solution. And sometimes working in particular industries, it's really important to have both of those options, or being able to cater for perhaps a hybrid cloud model. Maybe you have a partial private and a partial public cloud space. You need to be able to cover those different configurations that different providers are going to need and different organizations are going to need. And one of the things that sets Elastic apart is that it covers all of those. I think the second thing that I'd really want to talk about in terms of what is kind of different is the pricing is slightly different. I know you've talked in some of your prior episodes about some pricing around different observability platforms, but one of the nice things about Elastic is that there are some elements of the observability that are free. So if you're running it on-prem yourself, you're not having to worry about usage like you would in a cloud space. Then obviously you can have that and those features for free. And then there are other kind of features added on the top as per the other licensing models, rather than having to pay for a pair solution, which is the case with some providers, obviously. The third thing is probably our OTel kind of connections. So it actually integrates very well with OpenTelemetry. Of course, we do have our own APM agents that you can use, but we've really, because of our own open source roots, being part of the OpenTelemetry community, we actually have developers within Elastic that have contributed back to the OpenTelemetry ecosystem as well. It's really important for us to make sure that, that kind of option is available. So when people ask us, how they can send their data in, how can, it work as a collector, we do say, look, OpenTelemetry is definitely provided via the bridge as first-class citizen as it can be. The support does depend between clients at the moment. So Java is fully well integrated. Node.js for any web people is a bit more experimental, is feature flag required to switch it on. But the fact of the matter is that we want to make sure that OpenTelemetry is treated with first class and just works out the box with everything Elastic, because it kind of aligns to our open source heart at the end of the day.
I'm glad you mentioned the link into OpenTelemetry because it shows that Elastic is a player in the game of open standards for things like monitoring, which I think we really need because after visiting KubeCon just a few weeks ago in
Hmm.
Detroit and realizing the kind of the wave of the future is let's all agree on some kind of a standard and then let's build our solution on top of that to make it better for everybody. So
Hmm.
open telemetry is one of those things. I think
Yeah,
Prometheus is another one of those for infrastructure monitoring. So anything that you can do to at least tie into some of those things makes your product stronger because it makes it easier for people to get started right away. Do you agree?
exactly. No, no, absolutely. I mean, people move between different providers for different reasons. When I spoke to people in the community, there's been all sorts of discussion of wanting to move between different providers. I think OpenTelemetry makes it easier for people to try things out and make those decisions. It means that we've got an open standard so we can share best practices together across the entire community on how we can instrument and monitor our applications in the wild. And fundamentally, obviously, open standards just they really just help everybody kind of understand and learn. When you come into a community and everything is very different and different providers are doing things very differently, that makes it a really difficult learning overhead for new people coming in to
Mm-hmm.
this industry. So we want to make sure that everyone can pick things up as quickly and easily as we can. Is open telemetry perfect? No, I think thinking back to the RUM side of things, I know the RUM proposal is not quite as well fully formed, but you know what? We've done it with open telemetry more generally as a construct. I don't see why, as a community, we can't band together and try and have an open standards, which would mean that you'd have front to back capabilities across all these applications, and it would just give us all those benefits across the entire application stack.
Yeah, I mean, the way I feel is no matter what vendor you're part of, we all want better performing software, more efficient use of resources. Everybody wants that. And to make it easier for people to get into that and do it and take it forward and be able to share that, the faster we all get to those great, efficient, performant applications we all want instead of putting a
Mhm.
roadblock in front of somebody for some proprietary thing, you have to learn. So I think that's great. I want to mention Gartner for a minute because in some previous
Mhm.
broadcasts, I actually went through the Gartner hype cycle, the latest one for observability, and I kind of went through all of the major upper right hand quadrant players. And here's
Mhm.
the thing that Gartner talks about Elastic. They put them in the visionary quadrant.
Yeah.
So for people who are unfamiliar, you want to be in the upper right hand corner as far as you can get. That's what everybody tries to be, is the top right hand corner. But the 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 lower right hand corner, you're on the right side, which is that's the right
Mm.
way to go. But that the lower one is called visionary, and that's where Elastic kind of sits right below that line before that upper quadrant thing. And it says here,
Yeah.
I'm just reading from the report, it says Elastic is a visionary in the Magic Quadrant. It's available as SaaS and self-hosted. It's long. It talks about your strong proponent of open source, which we just mentioned of
Mhm.
OpenTelemetry, and its pricing was flexible. The only ding it had was that it was kind of complex to put the
Yeah.
thing together and scale it, which is why a lot of people I think choose the SaaS offering because it's kind of that
Yes.
complexity gets removed. So, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, to be fair, with my experience of learning and trying the different tools over the past 7 months or so, I'd say it's a statement that I would agree with, and it's a statement that we're aware of. We know that things like sometimes looking at some of our documentation, while it's dense and has a lot of detail, it can sometimes be a bit more difficult getting started. We do know that it comes from a bit more of a technical mindset. So, coming in brand new can also be quite hard. And we know that there's a lot to learn from it. Now, we have a quite thriving community that, is very welcome and encourages and tries to help each other out, which is fab. And that's something that everyone can be a part of. So we know that that kind of helps. But we know there's other things that we need to do to make it as easy as possible to try and get started with it. And that's something that we're trying to do through speaking more about the product, through considering our documentation, what features are being prioritized for future releases, and also in the roadmap in terms of where we're going to go next to try and simplify some elements. Because I think part of the problem as well is not just around the issues I've just talked about with dense documentation, but also there's a potential issue that I see when I started using it where in some ways there's multiple ways to do one thing.
Mm.
If you think of beats versus the new elastic agent, for example, and that's something that we're looking at in terms of our roadmap as well to try and make it still give you that flexibility, but also make it easier to get started if you're brand new to it as well. So it's something we are certainly aware of. And you can see some of the strides as well, I guess, in looking at how all our kind of Elastic Cloud deployments are set up, the introduction of Fleet, the ability to search and add integrations in a lot easier. Certainly comparing that to how to get started on-prem is definitely a lot easier. So we are aware of it and we are listening and we're trying to make it better.
Yeah, when I read something like that, though, I have to look at the other side of that and say, hold on a second. You're the same report that's telling me that software is getting more and more complex every day. The stuff that we're building is very complex, but you want it to be really easy to monitor and observe it. And it's like, can you have your cake and eat it too, sort of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The
It's a tough nut to crack, isn't it?
Yeah, to make something very easy is very hard to do. So
Oh
I
yeah.
think we've learned that over the years from Apple and other players like that. Um, Going back to this platform as a whole and just looking at like what Gartner is saying, Gartner's always looking for, where you're going to be taking the product next to put you in that upper quadrant. And I'm
Hmm.
seeing across the board, uh, everyone, Splunk, Dynatrace, and Datadog are all announcing new things that are kind of filling in. And I even should mention Instana as well, putting
Yeah.
in things that they have been missing over the last few years to make them what they consider to be a complete stack. It'll never be complete because there'll always be more data, more things to monitor. But I did want to mention with Elastic, one of the holes that was filled last year was with Optimizely. There was an acquisition there that was a profiling, continuous profiling agent, I guess, or a way that you can
Yeah.
grab in that data. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that works with the rest of the platform? And then where do you take the platform from here? Where are the other holes or things that you think need to be filled to bring you up to that upper right hand quadrant?
Yeah, sure. So with Optimize, one of the key things we've managed to kind of try and integrate into the platform is the universal profiler, as you mentioned. So yeah, there you go. So basically being able to kind of see the key blind spots, it's all saying it there. So what we have at the moment in terms of with the integration, the universal profiler is available in beta. So there's a sign up portion of our website where you can go and check it out. So if anyone wants to give that a try and use it in anger, give us some feedback. We would absolutely love that. Um, Obviously, one of the key things with Optimize is it makes heavy use of eBPF, which obviously is where the industry is going as well. So we have the Universal Profiler makes use of that, as well as there's some aspects of our security SIEM product that use that. So within the observability space, we're looking for future opportunities to leverage that because obviously that gives you kind of great kind of expansive capabilities for kind of more detailed detection and investigation and monitoring of what's going on. But looking to the future of the other things, we talked about kind of OpenTelemetry. We want to continue with that. I talked about the work we're doing to try and make sure all the agents have native first-class support with the bridge. So that's something that we're actively looking at. The synthetics offering needs to mature because this year we've built out the new offering in terms of the beta recorder that allows you to record your user stories and then you can upload those into Elastic and have it run the browser monitor periodically against those steps. So that and the writing of the playwright scripts by hand is something that has been getting a lot of traction this year and will continue next year as well. I talked about the Elastic Agent before, obviously moving to fill in the gaps that Elastic Agent currently doesn't give you over beats so that eventually you have basically one agent to rule them all. But there's other things more on the Elasticsearch, but still have, benefits to the observability community. So for that, I'm talking about, moving back to kind of more active development on Logstash, introduction of the KQL query language to make it easier to find things, which is obviously a big plus for our tool. And then obviously moving for serverless Elasticsearch, which is currently on the roadmap for the initial cloud version late next year. Obviously that will be a key win in terms of, trying to decouple the compute from the storage in terms of your search and your indexing capabilities. And that just basically is going to make for a better experience for anyone using observability generally.
Wow, that sounds exciting. I can't wait to see that. That'll be awesome.
Cool.
So one other thing, and this is not by any means the least thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about you and your wonderful article of how I discovered you, and I want to bring that up on the screen right now. This
Sure.
is from InfoQ. And this is how I
Yes.
found out about you. You had an article called "Are They Really Using It? Monitoring Digital Experience to Determine Feature Effectiveness." And of course, I know Ben Lenders. I've been connected to him for years and years.
Yeah.
Great guy. But loved this article. How you go into talking about how it's not just about the synthetic data. A lot of people are still monitoring with synthetic scripts. Maybe they're based on
Yes.
QA scripts or functional scripts or what
Hmm.
they think users are doing, but that's not the
Yeah.
entire story. And real
No.
user monitoring, although it's been around for a while, hasn't really been used as effectively as it maybe could have. And you outline
Hmm.
in this article how you can effectively do that and get the bigger picture to get that digital experience. Can you talk to this article and that whole concept of why you need both, not just synthetic?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So that article is kind of like a merging of worlds of my current role at Elastic and my prior experience that we talked about at the start, being a front end developer. Because as I said, these are questions I always asked, are my users actually using those features? Not necessarily in kind of a creepy keeping up on them way, but more in a, have I built something that actually is solving their problems? Um, you know, are they having a good experience with it? Is it running slowly? Is there a general downward trend? What's going on? And also, can I try and anticipate outages before they're going to happen? Because normally that didn't happen. I would end up getting a phone call or an escalation saying, what's going on here? Um, so merging those two worlds with now what I know about real user monitoring from working at Elastic, because I agree with you. I actually, even doing kind of speaking to the community more recently, real user monitoring does seem to be, in terms of the developer community, maybe more than the operational community, it seems to still be something that people don't realize is available and something you can do. And it's
Right.
something quite often that people will actually build their own thing
Right.
because they think, oh, I just need simple page views. I can build that. Yeah, that's totally fine. So it's more about kind of making a showcase of what you should be capturing and when. So when I talk about the synthetic monitoring, partially my view of that is that you kind of need it on both the developer and operational side of the fence, right? My experience was using tools like Cypress, although Playwright would be kind of one of the more emerging tools, on the end-to-end testing side. But then I would have colleagues in operations that would be building and support that would be building similar things in other tools using recorders to try and ping the same user journey, but against the application.
Hmm.
And the problem with synthetics, it's great for seeing if something's up, and it's great for seeing if something is being used as you would intend it to be as a developer or the people that built it. But I'm sorry, users don't always use your application the way that it's intended.
As
And
if I
that,
had a nickel for every time.
I know, I've had quite a few of those situations where it, just because you're so close to the detail of it as a developer, as an observability or SRE engineer, which whatever your role is, you're too close to the detail, and it's kind of your baby that you nurture and build and develop. So you don't think about that workflow where a user will, skip a step. We don't think about error handling as well as we should. And synthetic monitoring sadly doesn't pick up these things. It will only pick up what you think they're going to do because it's just an automated set of steps that you have basically said run against my application every 10 minutes or whatever you want it to run as. So I think you need both in order to have a holistic presence and to be able to say, my application is alive, it's effective for my users, and it's being used. You need to have real user monitoring. So not just talking about just simple things like seeing total page views, which is a common metric that RUM collectors will gather, but being able to see performance, normally dictated by Google Core Web Vitals,
Mhm.
although that's obviously not a silver bullet. There are
Mhm.
other kind of considerations like Google Core Web Vitals I spoke to someone about last week. Doesn't really pick up as well situations that are maybe specific to areas of the world where your application might be running that are kind of low bandwidth areas. So there's other things like page load duration by region, but it basically picks up that user activity, samples it, and will then have it collected, and then you'll have a series of dashboards sitting over the top. Now, obviously, the elastic way of doing things, we have the user experience dashboard in there. It connects as well. So it connects to, if you have application monitoring on your backend services, you can have the front to back tracing, so you can see the spans and everything all flows between. So you can connect to everything and see what's going on. But you also get all of these metrics and you get an insight into what's actually happening live against, that unexpected user workflow that you didn't know they were following. And it's something that I wish a lot of times I actually had access to, which was kind of part of the reason as well for writing the piece, because we all have those war stories where we've been dealing with outages and we think if I had data at my hands, I might have been able to preempt this or resolve it more quickly. And certainly real user monitoring gives you that. So it'll be able to calculate Google Core Web Vitals on your live traffic. It will be able to give you all these other kind of ideas of your durations. You'll be able to see your full spans of what's going on, error capture, all those kind of lovely things, but against what a user is actually doing compared to synthetics, where it's against what you think they're doing. Does that make sense?
It does, and I really hope that we see more on the operations side pay more attention to this than they have in the past, just from my experience, because we know from the recent reports that have come out about observability
Mm-hmm.
that the top performing organizations that are using these tools like this effectively are reducing the problems 90% faster than they did before they used it. And that's nothing to
Mm-hmm.
laugh at. When this gets to the can we solve it before our customers really notice it, and eliminate people complaining on Twitter and all those things that happen publicly, when you can
Mm-hmm.
fix that early, and that's a huge thing, and I just hope it gets more utilized in the near future. So I could talk about this all day. I know that you've got a time limit, so thank you so much for being on the show today, and you're welcome anytime. Anything you want to talk about, let me know,
Mm-hmm.
and we just really appreciate you being on the show today.
Cool. Thanks very much, Scott. It's been lovely chatting to you.
All right. Thank you, Carly, for being on the show, and thank you, Elastic, for allowing her to be on this show to talk about what's going on with the product. What do you think about Elastic APM and everything that you heard today? I'd like to know. You can reach out to me and give me your feedback at scottmoore.consulting. I'm also available on social media through LinkedIn as well as Twitter, and you can also email me directly at help@scottmoore.consulting. I'd like to know what you think about this show and about the show in general, every show that you've seen. If you haven't seen them all, you can see it on the YouTube channel. And if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can see content like this as it comes out. When it comes out, you'll be notified. So like, subscribe, share, do all the things, and that would really help me. And it helps me understand, am I going in the right direction? Are there other companies that you'd like for me to interview in the observability platform space? Are there other particular people? Have you come across an article around performance, any area of it where you thought it was interesting, you think it might be worth a discussion on the show? I'm game. Let me know. For this episode of the SMC Journal podcast, this is Scott Moore saying thanks again for watching, and bye-bye.